Good morning and welcome back to the Living Uncompromised podcast. Are you ready to dive into lesson 7?
Am ready to dive in and see this yet another interesting episode in the life of Samson.
I agree. I thought this one was interesting because, we've had all this really more descriptive violence and you can almost play it out and there is a battle scene here and there are deaths and things like this, but I do feel like we took it down a notch from last week.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. We see a different side of Samson this time than what we saw in the last couple lessons. And so I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, because when we left off, he had kind of gone to hiding. And so we pick back up, and apparently the Philistines have realized that he's in Judah.
Yeah, so they go down, just jumping right in here in chapter 15, verse 9. They went up and camped in Judah to go and get Samson and bring him back to make him pay for what he's done. When we left off last time, he has just killed many of their men, and then he went back to Judah. And so, yeah, they come to get him and take him back to pay for what he's done to them.
I'm sure that was really disalarming to the men of Judah to see so many Philistines come because, they rule over them. And so and they're not nice people. So to see a large amount show up, I'm sure they were more than just curiously asking, why are you here? I'm sure it was a more intense situation than that.
I think they're definitely afraid. Because we see that when they go to Samson, they say, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? So I think there's very much a fear there. Like, what have you done that they're coming over here to us? And we see they kind of hand him over, but their whole response is, why are they here? What have you done to us? Get rid of Samson so that we can be okay and they won't come after us. There's just a very much of a fear type situation because the Philistines are ruling over them and they're obviously not willing to stand up to them.
Well, and in verse 11, it's talking about they have formed 3,000 men of Judah have come together and going to get Samson. And so that feels like an army type of situation. A battle, what are we in for? What do we need to do kind of situation? Or to your point, they may know stories about Samson and what he's capable of. So maybe they felt like they needed that. I don't know. But nonetheless, they gather together in this huge army to go get one man.
They have, this huge army to go get him. And they don't deal with the Philistines on their own. They don't try to come after them or anything like that. They simply like, what do you want with us? Oh, you want Samson? Okay, we'll go and get Samson, even though they have this large group of men together. I want to point out what the Philistines said to the men of Judah, and that is, we have come to take Samson prisoner to do to him as he did to us. And so obviously they want to kill him. He's just killed a bunch of their men. So the men of Judah are like, they go find him. Instead of going, no, you can't have Samson, they're like, okay, we'll go find him. Samson's response to them is, I merely did to them what they did to me. And that just kind of reiterates that scene, that intense scene that we saw in the last lesson. In the last chapter, there was this retaliation that went back and forth and escalated to the point that Samson killed many of their men. And so he says, look, I did to them what they did to me. So now they're coming to get him to do to him, make him pay for what he's done to them. But as you said earlier, we're going to see it kind of take a little bit of a turn here. It doesn't seem so heightened because the Lord is going to equip Samson. And so we're going to see Samson is going to call on the Lord. So we're going to see it change just a little bit here, even though we're having this, look, they did this and I did this. And so,
yes, we definitely have stayed in the cycle and it just keeps going round. Your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. And it continues to stay one man against the Philistines. And so that will continue. I do think what you noted is important, that in this scene, we do see the Lord rush upon him and aid him when we did not see that in the last battle that Samson took on. So we will see, what he's able to do this time and his response to all of that.
In continuing that, they say to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." And he says, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." And they obviously agree to that and say, "We're just going to tie you up and hand you over. We will not kill you." So again, you see them totally abandon him in this moment, right? There's no support for him. There's no willingness to fight for their people. They're just going to hand him over and let him face the consequences for what he's done, but they're not going to kill him. So like their hands aren't dirty, but they're not going to help him. And so, yeah, you do have this kind of one man, one Israelite against this nation of the Philistines. It is really interesting because they do tie him up and they hand him over. And this is when we see the Lord come to his rescue here.
Well, and one note about that, I thought it was really interesting that the Bible made a point to say they tied him with new rope. So it was important to know, it was important for us to understand that this is brand new, which therefore leads you to understand the strength and it has not been compromised and things like that.
Yeah, I think, that does show us, okay, look, they have bound him and with, he should not be able to break free, but we know that he has, with the Lord's power, he has the strength to do it. And then that's what happens. He goes willingly with his people and to be handed over. But as he gets close, it says the Philistines come toward him shouting. And so I love that because then the Spirit of the Lord comes on him in power. So you have the Philistines coming toward him shouting, right? They're going to get their revenge and take him as prisoner and do to him, kind of just punish him for what he's done to them. And yet in that moment, the Spirit of the Lord comes on him. It's kind of reminds us of the scene where the roaring lion came, the lion came roaring at him. The Philistines are coming at him shouting, and the Lord comes on him in power in that moment. And it says that the ropes like melted from his hands. They just dropped off like they had been burned. It says charred flax, like they just melted away. It made me just think about how the Lord just comes to his aid at that moment because he was not meant to be their prisoner. That's not what God called him to do. God called him to overcome, to go in and begin the deliverance. And so him becoming their prisoner was not what God had in mind. And we're going to see that that's going to change because of Samson's decisions toward the end of the story. But what we see here is God equips him to do what he's called him to do here, just like he did with the lion. The lion was not meant to destroy him. At this point in his life, he's not meant to be their prisoner. He's meant to continue God's calling upon his life. And so the Lord aids him and allows him then to battle again, this one man against the Philistines.
Well, and I think another point with that is you see Samson would have been strong enough to even take out the men of Judah that came to get him. So he understands, I think, to some degree, his role in this too, because he could have fought them and gotten away. I believe that based on, we've seen his capabilities, that he could have at least not surrendered so peacefully. But he understood that they are not his enemy. He understood who his enemy is and what his role was, and that he maybe understood that he was to do this alone. I don't know, but it is clear that he had no help except the jawbone of a donkey, which is interesting that was the weapon that took out so many. But here we see it, and it says that, he struck down 1,000 men.
Yeah, and so much of Samson's, attacks or the things that he uses are so unconventional. But it says it's a fresh jawbone of a donkey. And so we have to believe that the Lord has orchestrated this to allow this to be available to him for this moment that he would need it, and I do wonder back to what you were just talking about. If, he went willingly, did he think, hey, God will deliver me in this? Like if they bind me and hand me over, the Lord is going to strengthen me. Did he have that confidence going into that? Because he does allow them to bind him and hand him over. And so did he trust the Lord in that moment to deliver him? We see the Lord does. The Lord provides this fresh jawbone, just happens to be there. And so we know the Lord has has created for him, and equipped him, and given him what he needs in that moment. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like, again, it's one of those moments where we read through scripture and we're like, oh wow, okay. And then when you stop and really think about it, you think one man and a jawbone, and he takes out 1,000 men. That is incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. And I think it's just such a reminder to us that God is not bound by our limitations. And we should remember that whatever our circumstances are, they're not the bounds and the limits to what God is able to do. And so we should not feel boxed in based on our circumstances, because he is far greater than that. And he can turn any circumstance into something bigger and greater for his will. I mean, when they bound him with the rope, did he really think it'll melt away? He might have thought I would be strong enough to break it, or things like that, based on what we've seen before. But, God, I think, loves to surprise us and show us new ways that he is there in his power, and what he can do with his power. And so melt away may not have been a first thought of mine, but here we go. And that's what the Lord used. And I just think it's such a sweet and fun reminder to remember the Lord is not limited to what our human minds can fathom.
And God can deal in the unexpected, right? It makes me think about when Jesus came out to the disciples, and he came out walking on the water, and they thought he was a ghost, right? They weren't expecting him to come that way to aid them in their storm. And so God does the unexpected too. And so we look for solutions, and we think, well, God could do this, or God could do this. We don't think, hey, fresh jawbone, let me use that to slay these people. But God shows up in ways that we don't always expect. And when we walk dependent on him, walk by faith that he will care for us, he will provide for us, then I think, we're surprised, and it's exciting to see how God moves, because he doesn't always move the way we expect him to. And we need to, that's faith, right? We just say, okay, let God do it. And then God has freedom. I think allowing God to have freedom to do it his way is exciting, because you don't know what he's going to do, or what he's going to allow you to do with his power. And I think that is an example here that we see.
I think you're right. And I think, it is what grows our faith. And I think at some point we should stop being surprised by what we feel is random, but the turn of events or the things that happened, because I think we should just remember that he's capable of all things, and he knows the big picture. And so at some point we should stop being surprised by what he does. But at the same time, it's so exciting, because it's just a reminder that we don't know how he's going to work everything out. We don't know what his plan is, but we trust him. And as he does things for us and reveal himself and his strength and his power to us, then that does grow our faith, that grows our relationship. And that's the cycle that we really want to be on.
I think it's exciting, and there's a lot of freedom in it, right? Because so much of the time we're like, well, this has happened, here's the ways it could work out. And we start kind of trying to filter our thoughts and our actions toward those filters, instead of going, I don't know how it's going to work out, so I'm going to hand it over and let God work it out. And there's just like freedom in that release. And you're right. Instead of being surprised, we're just excited because, oh, God did something super cool here, and I knew he would. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely a picture.
Well, and I think the freedom piece that you're talking about is so important. And I think we need to be mindful of, the control we try to hold on to when we try to make our own decisions. And, recently I was having to make some decisions and going through a stressful time and things like that. And I just remember my mind feeling so chaotic with what to do and this and that and all that. And I was reading my Bible, and I literally felt the Lord go, stop. Like with his hands up, like, just stop. And then the verse, be still and know that I am God, came to mind, just to rest, because I think that's what we've got to do. We've just got to stop and let him work, and then come alongside what he's wanting us to do. And instead of trying to handle it, and sometimes that even opposes him, just stop, let him work, and then move in.
Right. And trust him in that and what he's working. Yeah.
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 And so going off of that, we now see Samson's relationship with the Lord. And I feel like we're seeing him more personal here than we have in the past. What do you think?
This is the first time we've really seen this moment where he is calling on the Lord. And yeah, I think it's a different side of Samson that we see. He says, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I've killed 1,000 men. So we see kind of this declaration of what he's done. But then he says he threw away the jawbone, and then he was very thirsty. And so he cried out to the Lord. You know, it's kind of interesting, right? He's just killed 1,000 men single-handedly with this jawbone through the power of the Lord. So I'm not saying by himself, but I mean, he was a one-man army against these 1,000 men. And yet he's like, I've slayed 1,000 men, you know, I've slayed them with this jawbone. And then he's like very thirsty. So then he calls on the Lord, and it's just this more vulnerable side of him. Also, it just, you know, how God has to meet each of our needs. We need him in everything. He needed him to do what he did against the Philistines, but he needs him for his basic needs too. He's very thirsty and he needs to be refreshed. And that comes from the Lord as well. Not just the strength, but also the reviving that he needs. That also comes from the Lord.
That's right. And one thing I like about this is I think it's a reminder to us that we can be very specific with our needs before the Lord. He didn't just say, whew, you know, please help me in this safe prayer. He said, I'm thirsty and you've granted me this. Are you now going to kill me? You know, like, Lord, I've just done this. Are you going to now kill me and let me go to the Philistines? I'm so thirsty. And so I think it's a reminder that we need to be that personal and specific with the Lord. And I think sometimes we pray, you know, safe prayers, or we just kind of keep a surface level thing. And I think it's okay to say, this is my need.
Yeah. Well, and it's an expectation, right? Look, I need this. Are you going to just let me die here? Like, what are you going to do for me here? And it's just, I really think it's a lesson in the fact that God has to supply our needs. And it's not just the need for strength, it's the need to be revived, right? It's not just strength for the battle, but strength for just living and to go on. He needs to be revived in this. And that also comes from the Lord. And that's an important moment. And I think it's important that Samson understands that he needs the Lord to provide for him in this way. And he seeks the Lord in this. And I think that's important too. He knows that he needs the Lord to do this for him.
Yes, because we don't see him going off and trying to find the water on his own first. We see him just cry straight out. So he knows, like you said, with the expectation that the Lord will meet this need. And I just think that's an example to us in the midst of battle, even in the midst of battles or just everyday life, the dependence on him to supply our needs, whether every day or larger situations that we're going through, we can come to him with an expectation that he hears us. And I think that's where our faith and, you know, the mustard seed faith comes in as well.
Well, and he says, let's see, it's verse 19. It says, when Samson drank, his strength returned and he revived. And so I think there's this idea that there's this depletion after all that he's done. And so he's got to have this moment to be strengthened again. And that comes from the Lord and us seeking the Lord in those things, right? God provided for him in the moment where he was desperate and needed to go against the enemy, and the Lord provided for him when he was spent from those moments. So like you were saying, there's just those every single moment, great and small needs. God revives. I was looking at the question in our homework. It's question, I think it's the last question. It says, how do you see the Lord's provision and protection, and what do these things reveal about the Lord? And I just began to kind of think through these things that we see in the Lord here. And we see that God hears and that God does the miraculous, right, with the jawbone. And we see that God satisfies and God revives, which is what happens here for his thirst. And then God prepared him for the battle. He strengthened him. He provided for him. He rescued him. And so we see the Lord doing all of these things for Samson, both in the moment of the battle and the moment when he was depleted from that battle.
You know, and I'm just sitting here thinking as we're going through this, I hadn't thought about this before, but when we think about the Lord supplying all these needs and Samson crying out to the Lord for this need and things like that. This episode took place in the will of the Lord, the will of God. Whereas the battle before, we don't see that the Lord rushed upon him and that was his will to handle that. This one is a battle with the Lord. We see the Lord's involvement here differently, and I just think that's important for us to remember that this was done according to God's will.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. And I think also in this moment he was bound and he was not able, and he needed the Lord to do something supernatural here. Where the Lord had equipped him and strengthened him to go in and do the things the Lord had called him to do. I mean, he killed many of their men before, but this time he was in a situation where the Lord needed to rescue him. The Lord needed to break those ropes so that he could do what God, called him to do also, and have that strength to do that. But yeah, I definitely think we see the Lord move mightily for him in this episode and then revive him, different than what we saw the last time.
Well, I think this was an interesting conversation because when you first read these verses, you think, okay, it's not nearly as exciting, even though 1,000 men with the jawbone is exciting. It didn't read with the same intensity, but there's so much here. So now he's judged the people for 20 years, and we're about to step into a new scene. So we're going to exit this scene, and next week step into a new one, and we're going to find some characteristics of the Samson we've seen in previous chapters return, and it's all going to kind of come to an end here in the next few lessons. But I don't know, it's going to get exciting again, and I think read and go, this is interesting, because that's typically my first thought when I read it until I dive in. But I think there really is good stuff, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. I enjoy the conversation. I think we learn a lot about the Lord in this passage too. We've seen so much of Samson, and we know the Lord has equipped Samson. But in this one, we learn a lot about the Lord and how he cares for his people and what he does for us. And that's been really, really sweet.
Yes. Well, we hope everyone has a good week of study and diving in next time to chapter 16. And we'll go from there.
So sounds great. Looking forward to it.